Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Did you know that roughly 20% of the adult population in the United States suffers from anxiety? And we know that anxiety disorders are highly treatable, but many people actually don't seek out treatment, or if the treatment they're getting is perhaps not working. So we know that people who have anxiety disorders are 5 times more likely to go to a doctor and 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for different psychiatric disorders than those who do not suffer from anxiety. So why do I want to talk about this today? Because I've talked about generalized anxiety disorder on a previous podcast, but I do want to focus in on foods. Because many times we think about the different stressors in our life that can exacerbate anxiety, but sometimes we don't make that connection with what the foods are actually doing to us and how we can utilize foods to support a better overall mood. So I'm Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and today I want to talk about foods and their associations with anxiety. So what we do know is that there are certain foods that can definitely heighten one state of anxiety. And we don't have to search too far than to look into the standard American diet and realize that those high sugary foods, in particular, the bad fats, those bad carbohydrates, these are ways in which anxiety can really get taken to a whole nother level. And a lot of it comes down to hormonal regulation, neurotransmitter regulation, as well as with when you even think about regulating your blood sugar. So we know that certain foods can actually reduce your anxiety. And through the National Institute of Mental Health, they have actually looked at specific groups of foods that can be very, very beneficial. Now, one thing that's very important is to make sure that you are maintaining proper meals throughout your day. For many people, when they get these peaks and valleys, one would say, in their blood sugar levels, this can kind of start that cycle of making you feel a little bit more edgy, and that anxiety can creep up fast, which is why having small meals throughout the day, so, kind of continuously snacking. But we have to realize that it's the right foods that you must be snacking on. We can't be turning towards, potato chips or, junky protein bars and candy bars and things like that. We have to make sure that we are using foods that we know can actually be beneficial in terms of all of those different biochemical pathways. So we can look at things that are rich in B vitamins, like avocados, for example. Almonds, we know, have been shown to actually reduce stress and anxiety. So think about that. Maybe you start your day off with having a slice or 2 of avocado, and maybe midway through your day, you have 8 or 15 or so, well, just kind of a random number, but 8 or 15 almonds, for example. And these are just little tiny techniques that can start to create a significant amount of balance in your system. We know that antioxidants are incredibly important, and they can also help to lessen, once again, those symptoms of anxiety. So things like blueberries, for example, can be very beneficial. As a matter of fact, in a study that was published in the Indian Journal of Psychiatry back in 2012, looked at subjects who had generalized anxiety disorder along with depression, and they found that after 6 weeks of taking high antioxidant supplements, things that contained vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, that their conditions improved significantly. So we know, and even that research team concluded, that antioxidant supplementation could be a very useful supportive therapy for patients who have anxiety. Then we can look at things like omega-3 fatty acids, so things like fish oil, krill oil, flaxseed. We know that those fatty acids play such an integral role of the neuronal connections within the brain. And if we are lacking intake in omega-3s, which we know pretty much every single American is, this can also lead to this heightened state of anxiety. Now, interestingly enough, they've also been able to show that zinc, the mineral zinc, can help to lessen anxiety. Now, one thing that we do know is that many Americans have a zinc insufficiency. So not maybe a true deficiency, but maybe their intake of zinc is not high enough, and that this can be kind of one of those factors that plays a role into the worsening of anxiety symptoms. Now we can also look at chocolate. Now this is interesting because what we know is that chocolate has a lot of properties in it that can help to reduce the anxiety, but we have to be using the right type of chocolate. So I always encourage people that if you're going to be using chocolate, try to get an organic chocolate that is ideally 70% cocoa or higher, which means it's more bitter. But that also means it's going to have a lot more of those natural antioxidants and those polyphenolic compounds that have been shown to really target the release of cortisol. And this is key because when we think about the adrenal glands, this is what we want to be making sure that we are helping to regulate. And think about the endocrine system. So we have our adrenal glands, and that's where that release of the stress hormone cortisol is coming from. But then we also have that direct connection to the pancreatic hormones, including insulin and glucose. So what we see is when someone has elevated cortisol, oftentimes this can throw off that glucose insulin balance. And so this is another one of those pathways in which if we can target it or support it more with the foods that we are taking in, we can control our anxiety much, much better. So foods that trigger anxiety, we want to avoid. So we know all of those sweetened sugary drinks. So that can even be things like your orange juices or any of the fruit punch type drinks that people will think are healthy for them, but perhaps they are not. I always say, if you really want to, have a drink like that, get the Reds HX, add a scoop of that in with maybe 8 ounces of water, and you are now giving your body all of these powerful polyphenols and these antioxidants that can really help to give more of a positive effect on your overall mood, as well as helping with that regulation of stress. So we want to avoid the bad sugars. We want to avoid snacking on things like candies and, cookies and brownies and all of those things that we know they may be comfort foods. So when you're feeling a little bit more stressed, you think, oh gosh, it would be really nice if I could just have a cookie right now. But that actually can make you feel worse. In the moment, it sends a signal to the brain and you say, okay, yeah, that's nice. But we know what it's actually doing in the long run, which is it's exacerbating those symptoms of anxiety. So we want to avoid, fried foods, for example. So French fries. So think about that just for a moment. If you look at the way Americans eat, they go out for fast food for lunch and they're having a sugary drink. They're having fried food. So the French fries, they're having bad carbohydrates and bad fats. Hence, it's kind of a setup for a train wreck. And this is why we have to be cognizant of this. We know that things like alcohol and excessive caffeine can certainly trigger the worsening of anxiety. So there's many different ways in which we can make sure that we incorporate those right foods. As I already mentioned, a couple of different things, avocados, almonds. But the reason why certain foods have really been kind of profiled in terms of providing anxiety relief is what they actually contain. So if we look at foods that are rich in tryptophan, for example, tryptophan is very important amino acid because this helps the brain produce the chemicals that contribute to the feeling of well-being, which is what? Serotonin. And so if tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin, and the more serotonin we can help our body manufacture, it will help us have a overall sense of well-being. So where can we find tryptophan? Well, most people think about Thanksgiving and you hear about turkey. And of course, there is tryptophan in turkey. And for many people, they say, oh, you have turkey on Thanksgiving and then you feel really sleepy. Well, there is a little truth to that because of the fact that we know that tryptophan can help to make serotonin. And then the next step in that pathway is melatonin. But the big issue with trying to blame your turkey on your sleepiness is it's usually not the turkey, it's everything else that you ate, all of those other foods, those high starch foods. So it's more of a blood sugar crash than it is that the tryptophan from the turkey is making too much melatonin. So always keep that in mind. But it's kind of a cute thing that a lot of times people like to use as their crutch during Thanksgiving time. But we know that there are certain foods that are going to have higher amounts of tryptophan in it. So oftentimes people don't even correlate, like bananas, for example, have tryptophan. Oats, so starting your day off with oatmeal can give you a good exposure to tryptophan. Having different tree nuts, for example, sesame seeds. These are all things that you can find a good amount of naturally occurring tryptophan. And we know that when we look at the different constituents within certain foods, take asparagus, for example. This is really interesting. And for those who like asparagus, and maybe you also have the tendency to be a little bit more anxious, you may want to start to increase your asparagus intake. And the reason why is they have done studies, and once again, this was in the Indian Journal of Pharmacology, where they found actual antidepressant-like effects of a compound found in asparagus. And I thought it was such an interesting study the first time that it came across my desk. And this was many, many years ago. But I thought to myself, well, really? So if someone eats asparagus, this could actually help with their depression and their anxiety? And sure enough, yes, that is exactly what they were able to find, was that there are these different medicinal properties that are contained within the asparagus that kind of work in a sense for this kind of this chemical modulating effect within the body. And in doing all of their research with asparagus, they have found that it indeed really can help to support natural levels of antioxidants in the body, as well as really allowing the body to go through these different biochemical processes in a much more seamless way. So much research out there, but I want to talk about a study that came out last year in the European Journal of Nutrition. And they were looking at the association of different food groups with depression and anxiety. And here we go, because if you've listened to me before, you know I'm kind of a fan of the Mediterranean diet. And they said adherence to the Mediterranean diet has been associated with fewer depressive symptoms. But they weren't exactly sure as to which components. Was it just certain aspects of it, or was it all aspects? And at the end of the day, they found, of course, it's all of the different aspects. It's those healthy fats. It's those antioxidants that are coming from those fruits and vegetables. It's the good blend of the protein and the fiber that are coming from things like the seeds and the nuts. And through this particular study, they took the data from over 1,600 adults, and this was from the Netherlands study of depression and anxiety. And they were looking at the adjusted food groups from 238 different foods. So in this questionnaire, and what they found was that the participants in this study who had the highest intake of fruit and vegetables had the lowest levels when it came to the severity of depression as well as anxiety. So it's really very, very impressive when we think about why foods matter. And there are so many different foods out there that we know can potentiate such wonderful, wonderful benefits for us. And it's not just about the foods that you eat. There has to be some lifestyle modifications too. So even sometimes exercising and, getting on a regular sleep routine. This is a huge one for many people who have anxiety or depression, is that their sleep cycle can start to be impacted. But if you start to include in these foods that have tryptophan and have in fruits and vegetables with all of those powerful antioxidants, many times you will see that you start to create much more balance, and we're getting adequate blood flow into the brain, which is helping to promote the ability to even adapt to stressful situations. So all of the different things that we know about the foods are just another clear indication as to why foods matter so much. And when you look at the rate of people in this country, like I said, close to 20% of US adults suffer from anxiety. That's a lot of people. And you have to think to yourself, how much of that is strictly solely driven because of the foods that they're eating? And if they just change their foods, it could change their overall life in such a profound way. And we keep stressing the importance of fruits and vegetables. As a matter of fact, the American Heart Association, they just came out with another study where they're talking about the 5-a-day mix, having 2 fruits and 3 vegetable servings every single day. Well, we know that amount alone, 2 servings of fruit, that we have 76% of Americans that do not achieve that on a daily basis. And then 3 servings of vegetables, 87% of Americans do not achieve that. And then we can kind of default back to the study with the Mediterranean diet. They said those who had the highest intake of fruits and vegetables had less anxiety. Well, voila, there you have it. Another interesting study was published in the Nutrients Journal, and they were looking at dietary patterns and their association with different anxiety symptoms of older adults. And this was in what was called the Attica study. And this particular study, they were populating data from over 1,100 older adults in Greece, and they were looking for, any pre-existing cardiovascular disease. They were looking for other chronic disease states, including diabetes. And they asked them the questionnaire when it came to what they were eating on a regular basis. And they once again were able to find this strong correlation that those who had better dietary intake of those important food groups, including fruits and vegetables, along with those healthy fats coming from fatty fish, for example, that they had a significant reduction in having anxiety or even having depression. So if you look down at your plate today and you say, I'm going to have this burger, fry, and this milkshake, and while it may look really good, is this going to actually drive up my anxiety? And this is why that adherence to a Mediterranean diet is so important. Like I said, if you have close to 20% of the U.S. population suffering from anxiety, and if even half of those people change their diet, you could only imagine that complete reduction, that shift, and people would have more productive lives, and they would get out of that cycle. So I certainly encourage you to at least incorporate in good antioxidants into your daily routine. So even if that's just at bare minimum, taking a multivitamin such as the core multivitamin, or if you want to pack that punch and go with something like the Red's HX, also a very, very good choice. But start to incorporate in those healthy foods and it will certainly make a difference. So that is all that I have for you for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Do make sure you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.